Well, good morning from Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Good afternoon if you're east of here. Uh, I am delighted to welcome you to our first Let's Talk SADS live from Canada. My name is Shubayan Sanitani, and I am a pediatric cardiologist and electrophysiologist, and absolutely delighted to be part of launching this new series. And I really want to thank our partners in this at the SADS Foundation in the US, Dr. Mike Ackerman and Alice Lara and Aaron Waite, who have helped us get started for this new feature. And as I say, I'm very honored to be part of this, and I'd like to also just acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish First Nations here on the west coast of Canada, and privileged to be here and working in this lovely part of the world. A few housekeeping notes and a few apologies and qualifiers. This is my first time doing this, so bear with me. I'm still figuring out where I'm supposed to be looking and which screen I'm supposed to be sharing. And I have wonderful technical support from Aaron and Evan Kruger behind the scenes. And but we're gonna focus on why we're here. And the reason we are here really is to learn from each other and to bring awareness to SADS conditions, sudden arrhythmia, death syndromes, and educate each other and learn with humility and maybe have a bit of fun along the way. That's one of my side hopes. And why are we doing this? Well, as many of us got to witness in the past few weeks, sudden arrhythmic death can occur at any time, any place, unexpectedly. Many of our audience have been impacted by this. And so we want to continue to promote knowledge translation, learning, keep you, the audience, informed, and promote life-saving measures like CPR, AED, or automated external defibrillator awareness. Now, as you know, there's a lot of abbreviations in this field. So if I get too jargony, fire something into the comments and say, less jargon, less abbreviations. Speaking of the comment section, I've watched the great Mike Ackerman do his webcast and learned some things from it. So we're obviously not gonna provide medical care on the running commentary. So if you do have questions and comments, try and keep them in a manageable bite-sized portion so that we can read them as they scroll by. And again, we're not here to question people's medical journeys or their treatments as much as we are just to discuss key issues and topics. Now, speaking of the Mike Ackerman and the wonderful service he's done to educate on the whole SADS spectrum, people might say, well, why are you starting this? We were very happy with a very professional host, and this seems already like a bit like a Canadian hokey, the color's not quite right on the screen. We wanted to do a couple of things with this Canadian effort. We really wanted to support our Canadian healthcare providers and Canadian families. There are obviously differences in our countries and where we live, but we also want to make this relevant for people outside of Canada. Now, anyways, I've gone on too long. A little bit about myself. I'm a pediatric cardiologist and electrophysiologist. I work in Vancouver, and I've been part of the SADS Foundation since I became an electrophysiologist about 22 years ago. And part of the joy here is that I want to bring a little bit of a Canadian story to this. And so I'm going to share my screen, and Evan's going to back me up here. I'm going to share a screen here. So one of the things I want to do is share some Canadian fun facts and history, and we're going to invite our guests to, if they want to bring a fun Canadian fact, we're going to absolutely encourage that. We thought about calling this program Let's Talk SADS A, but we're still thinking on that. So what I'm sharing is a picture of George Ralph Mines, and so our fun Canadian fact today, although George Mines was from Britain, he had quite a good relationship with Canada, and he came over in 1913 and spent some time in Toronto, and he was recruited to McGill, where he became the chair of physiology. Now, he was one of the first people to study ventricular fibrillation and really advanced our understanding of ventricular fibrillation. In fact, he even described this vulnerable period. And many of us were talking about this vulnerable period as recently as the Damar Hamlin event, saying, did he get hit in the chest during a vulnerable period? So over 100 years ago, while working in Montreal, George Mines did, groundbreaking work on this. In fact, he died at 29 years of age, and people think that he might have been experimenting on himself, potentially trying to study ventricular fibrillation. So our fun fact for today is really just about George Mines, and also introducing the concept of ventricular fibrillation. And we're gonna talk about that probably as a theme, because ventricular fibrillation is, of course, a very lethal heart rhythm abnormality. So I encourage you to keep track of our fun facts, because we might have a fun Christmas or seasonal contest involving all the fun facts, not unlike the Amazing Race when they have that really hard last episode. Okay, but we're not here just to listen to me talk about strange Canadian trivia. We're here to get to know the founder of the Canadian SADS Foundation, and I'm so privileged that I met Pam Husband very early in my journey in Toronto. It was, I think, the last time the Heart Rhythm Society, back then it was called the NASB, was in Toronto. And so Pam and I met while I was training in Toronto, and she has been a tireless volunteer in the SADS Canada. So if we could bring Pam to the studio. Good morning, Pam. Thank you so much for this opportunity and for joining me. You're, of course, the perfect first guest. Pam, I really want to help our audience understand how does someone get pulled into this world, this SADS world? How did your journey with SADS begin?
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Sanatani. And yes, we did meet in 1999, not to tell tales on each other, a long time ago. We actually met at the very first conference that the Canadian SADS Foundation hosted, and it was at Sick Children's Hospital. And I think you were doing some study there at the time. So a little about me, not so much about me. I'm hoping that we spend a few minutes talking about the Canadian SADS Foundation, not so much about its past, but its present and its future. So I became involved in the Canadian SADS Foundation in many circuitous ways, I suppose. But it started with the death of our son in 1990. He was 16 years old. And he died suddenly, unexpectedly, was a healthy young man. And it turned out, first of all, that our son had had many years of symptoms, fainting spells, and had been misdiagnosed with idiopathic epilepsy. So upon his death, of course, we did not have a definitive cause of death until our daughter was subsequently diagnosed with long QT syndrome. So that, I guess, is the beginning of a long journey. A few years after 1990, I'm thinking it was maybe 93, 94, I became aware of the SADS Foundation in the US, who were pretty much in their infancy stage as well. And of course, I met some wonderful people. First of all, Dr. G. Michael Vincent, who some of the old folks who might be in our audience would remember, and also Catherine Timothy, who became a dear friend. And they were the two people, I think, that encouraged the Canadian SADS Foundation the most to become its own legal entity in Canada, to become a charity in Canada. And so we have been a registered Canadian charity since 1995. Long time. So over the years, and I'll just kind of briefly say, we've had tremendous success, I think, in many things that we've done. We've hosted conferences from coast to coast, all the way from Vancouver, BC to Halifax and to St. John's, Newfoundland. We have produced educational materials over the years, booklets on diseases, pamphlets. We've also produced videos, which will be on our YouTube channel, and so on. And what I do want to emphasize, and then I'm counting on Dr. Sanitani actually, and thanking him so much for agreeing to be our host, but I'm counting on him to keep me on point because I do ramble. But I do want to emphasize that all of what has to date been accomplished by the Canadian SADS Foundation has been by volunteers. And that, is kind of laying the groundwork here for some of the things that I'd like to talk about with Dr. Sanitani in terms of what we plan on doing moving forward. So, Dr. Sanitani, do you have any, where should we go from here?
Right. I slowly feel my first hosting job slipping away from me. Thank you, Pam. And your introduction to the SADS is such a common story where, a young person has symptoms. They're not necessarily recognized to no one's fault. I mean, these are not common conditions. These are, we wrote a study, several years back now that talked about there's a real lack of knowledge in the medical schools and and residency and training programs. There's just there's a lot of things to learn, and you don't see long QT syndrome every day. And so I have tremendous respect for my colleagues and frontline colleagues, and some of these diagnoses are tough, and it's such a tragedy when there is a an opportunity, what feels like a missed opportunity, and then but so many families turn that opportunity into community blessings and gifts. And and Pam, you've done that you overdone that with the Canadian SADS Foundation. And you mentioned Catherine Timothy, who some people will recognize that as Timothy syndrome is named for her, which she was very involved in describing a very unusual type of heart repolarization or heart relaxation disease. So yeah, Pam, I feel a real excitement around this, and also around the Canadian SADS Foundation. So what are some of your hopes? Like what I mean, they're the American or our American partners, and they are that. This is not a Canada hockey, Canada US hockey rivalry. This is a true collaboration.
Yes.
What are some of your hopes for SADS Canada for this year, or for the next couple of years?
Great question, and really happy to talk about that. For many of you who are in our audience, you've probably become aware of how suddenly, it seems, over the last year, that the Canadian SADS Foundation has been extremely active in the social media venue. That I can attribute almost exclusively to Evan Kruger, who some of you may be familiar with, to Evan, and to a collaboration again with the US and with Anna in the US, and with Aaron, who have trained Evan up and so on, because this is the future. Social media is not an area that I feel comfortable with, but it's the future of organizations like ours. I think it's fantastic that one thing the pandemic has taught us is how to use remote and virtual activity to really extend our reach. We've extended it far greater than we could have by depending solely on a face-to-face experience. And so for the future, where we are now, we've arrived at this point in our development, if you like, in our evolution, by primarily being dependent upon volunteers. And we, and by me, I'm saying we, because we have recruited new members on our board. We are working, the US people and Alice have constantly encouraged the Canadian SADS Foundation to look to its future. And its future is going to be, and has to be, more dependent upon a daily trained staff that can be responsive and accountable for the delivery of programs like this, like our social media, perhaps in the near future back to face-to-face conferences, and participation in the international SADS community as well. And so our big goal in the next year or two is to raise the kind of funding and put it in place in such a way as that we can achieve this business of hiring a full-time executive director.
Yeah, and I think, you know, and I'm glad we've come to this point, because I think, you know, some people may not understand that, you know, even what we're doing today takes, you know, funding. One would not want to leave the organization of this to me, probably not to you, and so absolutely, we're a nonprofit organization that does rely on donations, and I will forewarn people that I am going to ask people if they want to support us by going to the website. Obviously, there's no obligation, but in order to have that consistent presence, and have, you know, someone who can update websites, for example, and working in healthcare, we see this all the time, because healthcare has probably, you know, especially Canadian healthcare, has some of the worst websites you can see, and that's not, you know, that's not bringing the families closer to information. Now, you mentioned another thing, you know, that social media really is, and you had some very negative experiences this year, 22 and in the past couple of years. I wonder if you're comfortable just to share a little bit about that, because I really want to set the tone for our intentions and our expectations of how we want to engage with, you know, with other organizations, with our families. We know that there's a lot of misinformation out there, and there's a lot of skepticism, and that's okay. Everyone's entitled to their views, but tell us a bit about what was going on during these, you know, are you fabricating SADS diagnoses kind of things?
Yeah, I'm going to comment on it very briefly. I think it goes back to misinformation and a misunderstanding of what an organization, a charity, a patient support group, charity actually does. And it's really important for everyone to know that we are not the healthcare community. We want to, quite the opposite. Because we're not the healthcare community, we're very, very careful that we would ever comment on medical issues. That's really significant. So we're not the healthcare community. We hope that we're working with the healthcare community to, in fact, disperse better information to our families and and our patients and so on. So that's one thing. Another thing is we're not a government organization. We don't have an ability to generate statistics. We depend on statistics being generated from other sources, Stats Canada, from our scientific community who may have access to some of the statistics on sudden death issues and so on. And we represent people. We've been around since 1995, but I think, Dr. Sanitani, you would attest to the fact that these arrhythmia disorders are genetic for the most part. They're inherited, they are passed on from generation to generation, and they're not new. They're not absolutely new. And they can cause sudden cardiac death, but we know that many other things that are not under our purview and not our patient group's concern also can cause sudden cardiac death. So I think there's a need for some clarification there for sure. And I think that's all I'd really like to say about that.
Yeah, no, thank you. And, it reminds me of a point I wanted to make. Really, in talking, people say, well, how many SADS foundations do we need? And absolutely, someone pointed out in the chat, the Canadian healthcare system is very different, and so we do want some Canadian specific. We want to connect with Canadian providers, and we want to be of relevance. I think a very important thing to know for our audience is that all these these experts on inherited heart conditions, inherited arrhythmia conditions, the long QT syndrome and CPVT and other things that we are going to delve into as this series matures. But a lot of all of us are part of a community, and the number of collaborations going on in the background is really a very international community, and so many of us are friends and researchers together, and we get to interact. And so I'm excited to hear you mention something like an openness to in-person conference. I think those are really we really missed them during these last few years of the pandemic, and they're slowly coming back. And so we're quite excited. Certainly on the as medical professionals, that exchange of information in a person-to-person manner is so nice. That's a very costly undertaking, though, and so for now we'll be a bit more virtual. Now, in your I'm trying to do the math here quickly, but 1995, that is a very long time ago. I know this because my daughter was born in 1995, and also some of the landmark long QT genetics papers were coming out around then.
Yes,
So this must have been a very interesting time for you to be growing up really with the genetic knowledge. How are we doing as healthcare providers looking after families with these complex diseases? Give us some, I want to see these 3 things improve, let's say, or what are some things that we should be doing better?
Well, we're kind of a little bit on precarious ground here. I think we're also talking about delivering healthcare services at a time in Canada where healthcare in general feels pretty precarious. For seniors like me who don't even have a family doctor and so on. My own interest in patient care, I think, and it's very broad. We need the scientist. We definitely need the scientist. Our families need to believe that the future will be better than the present, and certainly better than the past has been. New ways of diagnosing, better ways, better treatment options. All of those things I think we need to look forward to, and we need you and your colleagues to keep us abreast of those kinds of things. I have a particular interest in the clinical experience that patients have, because I think some of them have been pretty fraught. They have been passed from pillar to post before they receive a correct diagnosis. They don't often get to the right expert. So their treatment options have been kind of funny and hazy and not consistent. So certainly I would put the challenge out to you and your colleagues to, to look at what we can do to develop some consistency and so on for and better experiences. Not all of them have been negative, of course. And I think we've made some really significant progress also in awareness within the general community of these conditions. So, and I think I'm going to kind of take over for a second here because there's something I really wanted to comment on, and that is the rationale for a Canadian SADS Foundation versus why don't we just continue to collaborate with the US and kind of blend in with it all, or the UK or any other group. And I think it's really important for our families and our healthcare community and our scientists and physicians that we are uniquely Canadian and that we can deliver a uniquely Canadian, hopefully positive experience to our families and our patients. And we're different. What we have found, and I know Alice would collaborate or agree with me on the fact that
Yes.
as the more we become involved in the international community of SADS, we find that every community, every country has a little bit of a twist on the way they deliver their services and so on, because they respond to the environment that they exist in. They respond to the healthcare system that they exist in. And so I would also say that there is maybe a perception that when you duplicate something from one country to the other, you are in fact accumulating unnecessary overhead. And I would really strongly argue against that. This is a small organization. We're not putting and thinking of putting an executive director in here into this organization that becomes a figurehead or an empire builder or whatever other terminology we use for just building overhead in communities. First of all, there's no empire here. And secondly, we need, a feet on the ground executive director who becomes involved in the community, who becomes involved in the healthcare system, who represents us both nationally and internationally. And in fact, works with hopefully some other volunteers and staff to put together better programs and respond to our patients and their families. So I would really argue that we're certainly not building overhead. I think what we are doing is creating accountability and consistency and sustainability in this wish to hire an executive director and probably some part-time support staff as well as we move forward. So I just had to fit that in.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So thank you for the opportunity.
Well, yeah, no, no, thank you. Thank you for your passion. And, I think one of our big roles is advocacy. And I think, there are opportunities for SADS to be a real champion. For example, one of my messages every day is surround yourself by people who will give you CPR. And I asked my wife this, not infrequently, whether she would or wouldn't give me CPR. And then on any given day, it's 50-50. But surround yourself by people that will give you CPR. And we have local experts. Katie Allen, who absolutely, Katie, if you're listening, yes, you will have to be on this show if they hire me back. She's done great work in Canadian schools about CPR opportunities and training. And so, we want to amplify those messages, and we want to support people going to their local schools and understanding the local environment. So exactly your term, we want feet on the ground so that someone becomes involved in in SADS Canada, but they can be in a rural community. We have ridiculous amounts of diversity in this country in terms of where people live and how they access their learning and their healthcare. So yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's great. I see a question in the comments there that I think is a great question. It's quite specific, whether there are international guidelines to whether they exist in the context of diagnosing SADS. And absolutely, there are several guideline documents. There are even a few very recent documents that that encompass several different conditions. I know I was fortunate to be part of the arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy document that came out now almost 3 years ago, and so there are constant updates, and I think that the international community is very active in producing these guidelines. If I can read between the lines, some of these documents, they're mostly read by the people that are already in the know and in the field. So no one is more excited about the latest, Chris Semsarian paper than all of the people already in the field. And yes, that was absolutely a shout out to my friend and colleague in Australia who does amazing work down there. And so how do we get the message out? And part of that is we have to learn from our patient, and that's one of the things as well. And I was glad to put Pam on the spot to push us around a little and say, what should we be doing better? And patient engagement, patient and family engagement is so important. So Pam, I wonder if in a few minutes remaining, if you could just give me a couple of you mentioned you have some new board members. We're very keen on raising the funds to formalize the structure of the organization a little bit, to really to to relieve you of some of your years of service as the least paid executive director in Canada. What are a couple of your closing comments for our audience?
Yeah, thanks. I guess my real hope and wish and belief, actually, I believe this this program, this webinar series is going to be fantastic. Certainly after this, Dr. Sanatani will be concentrating much more on the scientific healthcare aspect of these conditions and really delivering more specific of that kind of information to our audience. So thank you for bearing with us. I think it was really important for us, for Dr. Sanatani and for me, to really explain what the Canadian SADS Foundation is about and to provide a context for why we're on the move for funding to be able to transition to something more sustainable. And I also just want to say this before I close. This has been, for me, a fantastic, unbelievable, and totally unexpected journey. And I owe so much to so many people. None of us do anything independent of the world around us. At least that's my particular philosophy. I have a wonderful family that supports me. I have friends. I have the luxury of entering into my 70s and having the kind of health that is going to allow me to enjoy myself, hopefully. Do some things I've always wanted to do, just actually have a day of doing nothing. So, but I owe so much to you, the families, the resilience that you people show, the resourcefulness. And I really hope that you'll continue with that you'll continue with us, that you'll support us. You'll come back for our next show, and you'll provide us with the feedback that we need to be able to be responsive to you and what you think you're expecting from all of this. So that's about it for me. I think I've had a great afternoon, and thank you so much to everyone.
Thank you so much, Pam, and we will look forward to having you back as this as this progresses. And certainly we do want to. I'm promising all kinds of things here. I'm sort of like a politician in the election phase. I definitely want to have a patient voice coming on and being my guest. that said, a couple of announcements. First of all, I want to thank Pam and SADS, both SADS Canada and SADS US for facilitating and enabling me and having me here. It really is a huge highlight and an honor. A little bit intimidating as well. There's lots of learning that's going to happen. And then I'm just going to share a couple of messages here as we close. One of them is so February, and Evan, if you can just share this. So as many people know, February is Heart Month, and we punctuate that with a big smushy Valentine's Day right in the middle, and then we finish it off with my birthday at the end. So what I'd like to ask everybody to do is take on a CPR challenge in February, meaning refresh your CPR, relearn your CPR, get recertified, and if possible, bring a friend. Get someone who maybe hasn't got CPR training and promote CPR awareness. So I really want to live in a world where anybody can give CPR and will do so if they witness someone collapse who appears unresponsive. So absolutely the cheapest, best value for saving people's lives. So learn CPR challenge. And then I want to, now I'm probably going to mess this up. I'm going to try and share this. I want to give us a little sneak preview of our next feature, which is hopefully showing now. This is assuming that I get to be invited back in February, and our good friend, Dr. Andrew Cron. And of course, in Canada, he needs no introduction. He is really one of the giants in the field, literally and figuratively, but also internationally hugely respected. And so I'm looking forward to having a chat with Andrew Cron, who of course founded the HERO, or Hearts in Rhythm organization. And so we're going to explore ways that we can support each other in our shared vision, really, of helping families and patients with SADS conditions. So that's the third Tuesday of February, the 21st. So we haven't hit a regular pattern yet. I work very erratic hours. So that's all for me. I really want to thank the audience and the technical people behind, and thank you to those who put some comments in, and I look forward to a bit more of this. And again, February, learn CPR, bring a friend, and I think we will sign off a couple of minutes early, just as a special treat for people today. All right. And then I have no idea how to